Hello, and welcome to the Wade Borth podcast. I'm your host, Wade Borth, and in every episode, my goal is to get you to think differently about how money works and ultimately to empower you to take control of your money and your personal financing system. Hello, and welcome back to the Wade Borth podcast. In this episode, we're going to continue on a bit of the conversation we had previously where we were talking about what's the process of starting IBC. And the first step that we addressed was really having a good understanding of the problem, addressing that, and then knowing where we want to go. Because once you do that, then the rest of the next couple steps are relatively short and simple. But a lot of people want to start at the bottom and work up versus understanding the problem and then working down. And so, or they want to start at 4 and work back to 1 versus starting at 1, because really where the work comes into play is that number 1, and that's where the mental work really starts. And so a lot of people want to ignore that and they want to go directly to step number 4, which we're going to call the product. Most agents start there because they don't understand how the process really should work, and so they start with a product, and it confuses a lot of people. It creates a lot of noise, quite frankly, out in the industry. I don't typically catch a lot of Facebook. I don't go social media a lot because there's just a lot of confusion out there. And so my voice is through this podcast. So I would love if you like the podcast, you shared the podcast, you commented on the podcast, because that's how this message gets out. We're out on social media a lot of times, and maybe that's how you found us. So I'm glad to hear that. But again, I just see it as that everybody wants to start with number 4, which is here's the product, because then that becomes the conversation. But if we have, it's like saying who's got the better hammer, who's got the better drill? Is it Makita or is it DeWalt, right? Or is it, everybody has their own flavor of where they want to go, but they don't understand what they're trying to do with it, right? So it's like they say, I got the best cordless drill. Oh yeah, hey, that's great, but what are you trying to accomplish with it? And then they kind of look at each other like, what are you talking about? So anyhow, long story short, let's talk about steps number 2, 3, and 4 maybe in this podcast. Because again, go back and listen to the problem, because that to me is the key. And if you understand that, then these next 3 are really kind of simple. So step number 2, finding a practitioner that knows what the heck they're doing. I'm going to say, if you're listening to the podcast, you're more than likely you're working with me. If you're not working with me, I'd say, why not? Maybe not the right fit. I don't know. But the point being is finding a person that knows what they're doing, finding a practitioner that has their own series of policies, finding a practitioner that has made mistakes. If you haven't made a mistake, you're not trying, quite frankly. And I've made mistakes. I'll tell you all of them. Well, not all of them, because there's so many of them. But the point is, you're not just getting this pretty face. You're getting years and years and years of experience of that have done things wrong in the past. And like, don't do this because that was a mistake or that wasn't the right thought process. And that's why I actually enjoy doing the podcast, because I can share those things that are lessons I learned that I can share with other people. Because my ultimate goal, my vision, my jam, as it were, is to help people get out of that bondage of being indebted to Wells Fargo and Chase and finding the freedom and control that they want, right? And I don't want to do it for you. I want to empower you to do it. I'm going to graduate from this world someday. So if I just do it for you and never teach you, what good does that do? So again, finding somebody that wants to empower you, not take your control and not take your authority away from you. That's really key. That's important. That's vitally important. So finding the right person that you want to work with, finding a person that has the same set of values with you, so finding a person that understands and has listened to you and hears what you're saying, and that can put things that you're saying into context that says, okay, now we can find a solution. Finding somebody that's abundant, right? I think about this quite often. I said, we spend a lot of time trying to bring people into the light when there's a ton of people in the light ready to hear the message, understanding where we want to go. Those are the people that are listening to the podcast. Those are the people I want to work with. They say, well, what's your demographics? I talked to a lot of marketing people. I said, people that are teachable, people that are coachable, and quite frankly, people that are fun and like being part of a community that saying, I want to be part of a larger community that's taking control of our lives and having more certainty in our lives. So if you think about that and you say, that's who I want to be, think about who do you want on that journey with you. Maybe me. Maybe there's people in your lives that you want to have them learn this message as well. If you know people in your life that say, hey, they need to hear this message because I want them in my journey as well, because you want them part of your community. I mean, just imagine you're sitting down at coffee on every Saturday morning. You go to your infinite banking club and you have 4, 5, 8, 10 people around you that think like you do. How much more powerful is that going to be in your life than just being you on an island by yourself? Think about the different opportunities that can be brought up. Buying real estate, buying different ventures, talking about how you're using your policy, talking about how it's affecting your family and your family's lives on a positive note, how it's fulfilling those 5 areas of your life that are so valuable, right? Your service to God and your family and yourself and your business and your community. How much more enlightened can that be when you have other people around that you can share that with and you can grow with each other? But you have to build that community, but you have to grow yourself first. And it really starts with finding the right person that's going to help you, it's going to empower you to make that happen. So let me go back and just recap. Step number 1, understanding what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Where's the pain in your life and what you're trying to solve for? That was a previous podcast. This podcast, we're talking about probably the next 3 steps. Where are we at to finding somebody that can help us along that journey? Again, if I'm guessing if you're listening to the podcast, you're maybe a client of mine, we've already had conversations, or maybe you want to be a client of mine, but reach out to me, Wade at sagewellstrategy.com. Go to the website, sagewellstrategy.com. Give us a call. Have a conversation. You'll quickly know if I'm the right person to work with you. Follow your gut on that. So that's number 2. Step number 3 is, what's the process? What's the process that you're going to set up? What do I mean by that? What's the process? And we've talked about these things in previous podcasts. We've talked about them in some of our blog posts on sagewellstrategy.com. But the point I make is, what is your process? Do you have a process? And if you don't, then it's going to be a lot more difficult to make this thing happen. One of the things we talk about in a process is when you take a policy loan, or you have the capabilities of borrowing against your policy, you have a rule saying, hey, we might, if we have $100,000 or $1 million, it doesn't make a difference what the number is. But if you had $100,000, maybe you say, I'm only going to borrow up to $80,000 of that or $75,000 of that because I want the rest in reserves. That's part of your process. And when you do take a loan, have you set up a loan payback structure? And why are you doing it? And then do you have it set up to be paid back monthly with principal and interest? I mean, it's the process of owning the banking function, but it's also the responsibility when you own the banking function that you owe it to yourself, to your family bank, as it were, to be as respectful of that money, or quite frankly, be more respectful of that money than you are with Wells Fargo's money. But think about the process they have you go through. They get you to do direct deposit. They do direct ACH draws on your account to pay back loans. They have loan documents. They have a process. And what's your process when you do this? Are you treating your business, your family business, like it should be treated? Or are you abusing it? And most of the time, if you don't have a process, you're abusing it. You're not necessarily abusing it out of malice or bad intent. You're just doing it out of, you didn't know any better. But now I'm telling you, you're going to know better. It doesn't have to be complicated, by the way. It's very simple. Take a loan, do an amortization schedule, and then set it up on a monthly basis that it comes out of your personal checking account to pay it back. That's simple. You can make it more complicated. I've seen people make it more complicated. Maybe it has to be more complicated as you move along, but the very first step doesn't have to be difficult. It's easy. But that's understanding the process. That's step number 3. And that process, although it can't guarantee success, will help ensure that you have the right environment for success. Because remember, I'm not here to do it for you. I'm here to help empower you to make that happen. And that's the real key. All right, let's go to step number 4. Step number 4 is rather interesting. Because this is where everybody wants to start. What product do we use? What mix do we have? Blah, 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 blah. Lots and lots of noise. I was on Facebook. There's a couple, 3, 4 infinite banking communities out there that it's just so annoying because everybody is killing everybody else because they don't do the right mix or they don't do the right company or they don't. All I would say about the product is make it a dividend-paying whole life insurance policy through a mutual insurance carrier. Now, you're going to come to me. I have the favorites, and I'll tell you why I work with the ones I work with, who I work with, right? I'll tell you that. I'll tell you that One America to me is one of the best companies financially because I've watched companies over the last 35 years That experience doesn't necessarily mean we're not going to make mistakes, but I can tell you that it sure is helpful. I've seen companies that in '06 and '07, they had the best dividends, and that's what I hear right now. This company's better dividend than this company, and that's they're fighting over the scraps versus looking at what is the underlying pillars of the company. And then when stuff hits the fan and these companies have huge write-offs, nobody talks about that anymore. They just move to the next company. Well, what about the clients that had policies for the last 10, 15 years with that one particular company? Where is their dividends now? Well, sorry, you're the wrong one. So my point being is that the product that we use is just the tool that we're using. And so we just want to make sure that we have a good tool, and it will be a great tool if you use it correctly, because it's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. So think about that. As a saw, if let's use a cordless drill. That's the best example. Like if you have a cordless drill as a tool and you use it as a hammer, how long is it going to last? Not very long. If you have a hammer that you're trying to use as a drill, how long are you going to be using that? Not very long. It might be the greatest tools that you could buy. One might be if you're a Makita guy, or if you're a Milwaukee tool guy, whatever it is, that cordless drill, whatever brand name it is, it might be the greatest tool that's out there. But if it's not being used correctly, it doesn't make any difference. And quite frankly, is it any better than the next competitor? Is the DeWalt better than the Makita, better than the Milwaukee? Maybe some features here and there, and that's what you got to look at. How is that meant to serve me, right? Is it serving me the right way? If I know exactly what the problem is, I'm going to go back to step number 1, previous podcast. Go back and listen to it. If it's solving your problem, then it's the greatest tool in the world. But if you think you're going to buy the greatest tool in the world, not knowing what the problem is, and then when you get to the problem going, well, this isn't exactly what I needed, then you're not going to be happy. So that's why I said don't start with number 4 trying to figure out number 1. Start with number 1 and then figure out number 4. Start with the problem, figure that out, and then you know what's the right product for you. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, the product and the company is important, definitely hugely important. But don't let that noise deter you from taking you down the right path of solving for the problem. I think that's where a lot of people get kind of distracted and they get off track and they get discouraged with this idea, this conversation around IBC, is because they're trying to figure out what's the right product, what's the right design, what's the right company, and they get so caught up in that they haven't gone back to the problem and said, okay, what is the problem, and do I have the process in place? And oh, by the way, I'm going to make this, now I know which product I need, and I know which design I need to solve all these other things I'm trying to do. And once you do it in the proper sequence, it makes it so much easier. But when you start at the bottom, trying to work your way to the top, that's when it becomes difficult. So I would say a couple of key takeaways from this podcast. Don't start with the product in mind, right? That's just the tool. We have to try and figure out, let's look at the blueprints of the house and how we're going to build the house. That's the issue we have to deal with. And once we know that, then we're going to know which tool we need to have. But at the meantime, finding a person that understands how to read the blueprints and understands all the key features of the product. Your IBC practitioner, me, right? If you're a client of mine and you say, man, there's a lot of people that need to know this, I'd love to be able to have that conversation. Share my information with them. Do an introduction, and I'll just educate them. I'll educate them on what we're talking about. I'll have them listen to the podcast. I want to empower people. When you want to, and so if I'm here to empower somebody that you know or you, then that's the position of strength that I'm trying to give to them, empowering them to make the right decisions. All I'm trying to do, provide them with enough information so they can make an informed decision. And that's really where we're at. And so if we start down there and we have a process, a proven process, and say, what's the next steps or what do we need to do? We can show you what that is. Then the product becomes kind of a secondary conversation. But don't get caught up and frustrated not knowing what the right product is, what the right policy is, or the design. Because again, I've said this before, that's where people find a huge frustration, is that they try to go there not knowing where it's hard to buy the right set of tools when you can't even read the blueprints of what you're trying to build, right? Are you buying a wood cutting blade and bits for a masonry house? If you are, then guess what? You have the wrong tools. And you're going to be frustrated. You're going to say, this works, it sucks, it doesn't work. Well, okay, who's that on? So anyhow, think about that. Would love to hear from you. I'd love to reach out to me at Wade at Sagewell Strategy. Give me a call. My phone number's in the notes. Love to hear from you. Book an appointment. Love to have a conversation. But think about having the right sequence is going to be the key to what we do. Go to sagewealthstrategy.com, look at our website, look at all the material we have to educate people and say, what does that do for me? How is that getting me to understand what the problem is, and then ultimately what is the right tool to help fix that problem? And do I have a process to be able to empower you to take control of that function in your life? Find the certainty and the freedom that you're truly looking for. If you want that freedom and that certainty, we can help you get you there. But again, it's going to be help getting you there, not getting there for you. Thank you. Talk to you soon. If you're enjoying this podcast or know anyone else that might be interested, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and please leave a review. This will help this podcast reach and help more people by ranking higher in searches and ultimately help more people get out of financial bondage. And don't be afraid to share this podcast with your friends and family, as we can be easily found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.